Welcome to another special interview from Havana. In this opportunity, we've moved to the west side of the capital where the Antonio Nuñez Jimenez Foundation for Nature and Humankind is placed. There, we met with Liliana Nuñez Velis, president of this non-governmental organization that works since 1994 for a culture of nature integrating the society and its surroundings.
Thank you, Liliana, for receiving us here at the headquarters of the Antonio Nuñez Jimenez Foundation of Nature. Thank you for dedicating this space to From Havana tell us in English. Who are they, Antonio Nuñez Jimenez and Lupe Velis?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to come and give us the opportunity to show our foundation. Well, Antonio Nuñez Jimenez and Lupe Velis were a couple. They're my parents as well. They'd met before the triumph of the social revolution. He was a geographer and she was a dancer at the moment. She is the founder of the ballet Alicia Alonso, and she always was a woman related to the arts, had that sensibility, that woman with a lot of culture. And then it was understandable like a man, like Antonio Nuñez Jimenez, who had at the time, there was a man very radical in his idea for the era and within the communal revolutionary movement because of the training. As a geographer gave me the opportunity to know every corner of Cuba and to know the situation of the Cuban countryside in the decade of the 1950s. His imprint as a geographer was to bring forth the work of the field of geographer, not only as a cabinet geographer, but that gave it the imprint with the Cuban geography that had a distinguished personality such as the teacher Sara and Is Helge, Salvador de Masip, who were actually eminent geographers. And that way Nuñez, my father, complemented the combination and theatrical part with the practice as well. His social ideas, his community socialist, entering to the ranks of the Popular Socialist Party, and with the social vision that brings the contribution to the column 8, and the advancing of the revolutionary forces in the year 1950s from east to west. When the rebel army arises, they take the promise of Las Villas. Nuñez is captured by the knowledge of the art to carry out the strategic design of the Valley of Santa Clara. So I can say that my father was a very smart man. I know what he was doing. Nuñez was already identified because of the first geography book that he writes was a milestone, was an icon within the Cuban geography, because he speaks of a balance between physical geography and social-economic social geography. And by putting all these elements in equilibrium, the government of Fulgencio and Justicia was ordered to burn those tests. He was already a well-known person within the liberal and radical Cuban movement, so the rebel army movement kept him as a key person to this fusion to the Che guerrillas. To the triumph of the revolution, because of his slowness of obtaining Cuban territory, the revolutionary led by Fidel appoints Nuñez as the first secretary of the Secretary of the Agrarian Reform Act from the National Institute of the Agrarian Reform. He was actually very known for that, so he was so important to the guerrillas, whose mission was to implement the revolutionary agrarian reform law, and then goes to the Cuban and lead Academy of Sciences. That his antecedent was the Academy of Medical Science. He did not have to have a contemporary conception of a modern science academy, and he one of the that was worked for more over the 10 years, from 1962 to 1972. This personally for him and from the history was a summit of the moment of contemporary Cuban science, because the institute are created with a new design. The Institute of Geography, the Institute of Meteorology, the Institute of Oceanology, the Institute of Science is created. Many institutes created very focuses on deepening the branches of science in Cuba, because it was very important for the moment. Even though it was happening in a socialist movement, they even wanted to create a movement that it focuses on science, and to make Cuba a science potential. On the anniversary of Cuba Caving Society, his greatest contribution as a choreographer was knowledge of the subterranean world of Cuba. Until that moment was very veiled, and he, in that moment, provides that knowledge. With 16-year founders of the Caving Society of Cuba, with the feet of his kind in whole Latin America and even the world. And during those years as a builder of the system of the sciences in Cuba, Fidel sent him as an ambassador of Cuba in Peru. And at that time, when the socialist movement in Latin America, led by the general Cuban Velasco Alvarado, became very important with the alliance of Cuba. During that mission as Cuba's ambassador in Peru, Nuñez goes out on the fields, the deserts, the mountains, the jungle, the winter, and even to the Peruvian Andes. As a result of these tours and this investigation, he publishes his first works, The Petrologists of Peru. He was a lover of the rock art. The Order of the Sun, actually conferred by the government of Alan Garcia, was the most distinguished there. For example, for the cover government, they wasn't even superior. On his return to Cuba, they began to work with the Ministry of Culture. Within the mother heart, who was a minister, my father, Antonio Nuñez, takes personally care of the vice to carry the international, to my mother carry out the relation of international. They always had a great communication of work. Long before this stage, my mother, Lupe Velis, who was the founder of the Federation of the Cuban Women, they always gave a contribution to our country, to advance and to make a contemporary movement in the complexity of this role of women in a society that was being transformed at a time. For example, this in this moment wasn't nothing that it was seen in the world. Then, in the years of the 90s decade, beginning of the special period, one of the branches that had most press in Cuba was the polygraphic movement. And my father had wrote a collection of 15 volumes called Cuban Nature and the Mankind, which is one of the main reasons that has today that the foundation to finish publishing that important and iconic collection. Besides, there are others of the part of the collection. In this context, they need to prioritize other sectors of the country and other major social issues of the priority of the crisis. Cuba personally gave the writers the possibility of looking for other options, which my father proposed was the creation of a foundation of an NGO, which is a non-governmental organization. And there we are here now, that would allow to capture the funds of the corporation, that would allow to seek financial complement of this mission that the state could not do. I personally think that giving a look back to all of this happening, my father was always focused on making a social movement, an economic movement, a geographical movement, and a scientific movement as well, accompanying the guerrillas, the socialism, and the communism that was actually being born in Cuba. So it's actually a very important part in the story of the world, in the story of the socialism and the communism that is very important as well. So my father did something important for me, and I want to continue with his legacy.
As is the foundation Antonio Nuñez arises. Good. Of the nature of the man later Antonio Nuñez Jimenez, as is that arises and how it begins that link.
We are right now what is the backyard of a family home. My father, whenever he lived, he always created a special space where to put his books and rocks. My mom always used to tell him, "You name the sound of house, they are rocks." So he born a collector. He collected everything. He didn't want to throw anything away. Thanks to that, there is a certain town in the family house had a very large patio, and with the support of the Council of State, the plan was very afraid because of the many of the files that he was keeping his work was very scattered, and obviously the years were going passing, and then for low life, he had to disappear, he had to die. And he had the anguish that they will be scattered, and there was no union at all. Many of the files that we have now are because the human beings are not perfect by conceptions, and certain either achievements and many institutions were thrown away. Many times, he was walking down the street, and for example, the most valuable file that is the Sanchez Gobin, his offender, that it was dedicated to boy the archives of civilians in Cuba, here to the Cuban line. He went one day in the street and found that we were pulling and picked one. Of course, those books was all in the house. And of course, the books were in the house, and then by agreement the idea was on the government again. He delivered the land, the collection that they supported him in the construction of a building of a more European-style foundation, and they were formed by the Saxon style, where the state had the support of these entities. Then, by agreement of the Ministry of Justice and Counts, our institutes created a foundation of the nature of a man. There was a time not called the foundation of Antonio Nuñez, was called the foundation of nature of man, because the fall existed like the antithesis of the foundation as a fall, and to the 4 or 5 people, nothing else was conforming. In the year 1994, he already made a public character to be created as a foundation, opens us with the character of public services, and created a project, a area of capturing, recovering, found, and not only for the publication of all the work that he had at the moment. The fundamental work of this area of cooperation was to raise funds and to have a greater impact of all that was a conception of nature. I personally call it to a nature because a general lot of terms, as the terms are working, the collaborations could support of the imprint that has always had the scientific side in Cuba, or protection of the nature, and then the contribution of the civil when a strong community component. That was the idea, and of that the share of the articulation of the different actors, in that by nature is not related to whoever the incident of its work. It is in the same subject as well. It is the social vision that the aim of the foundation, and it is what we have maintained, what the previous that could be the role of the foundation within the Cuban civil organizations, in the relationships, in the state, and I think the foundation is fulfilling this goal. It is personally the social vision that aimed for the foundation, and it is what we have maintained until today. What the previous that could be the role of the foundation within the Cuban civil organizations in their relationship with the state, and I think the foundation is fulfilling this goal. It's making this goal happening, and it made the whole happen a lot of years ago. 2 fundamental lines is to join their files in a program of conservation. It integrates for the specialists that their mission is to preserve, that it continues to grow, and there's another type of work that we cannot say that is outside and articulates a conception about conservation without fundamental and community plans.
Why is it important to maintain the scientific legacy of a man like Nuñez that has been recognized by scientific, by different academics, not only Cubans, but also international, as the fourth discoverer of Cuba?
As I told you before, the definition of the fourth discoverer of Cuba is because he gives the contribution of the Cuba that I was not seen the underground Cuba. For example, Colón is the one that links 2 worlds. Then, after comes Alejandro de Humboldt, who is considered the second discoverer of Cuba, because it registers and begins to make a cataloging of the riches of the Cuban biodiversity with investigative methodology. Then comes Fernando Ortiz, that defines and gives the panorama of the Cuban nationality. Then it means to be Cuban and what Cuban ethnicity is. And finally, Nuñez, for his contribution, brings to the open that is what not visible, and with the word of bottling, and with what is defined of the Cuban society as the fourth discoverer of Cuba. Now, I think the most important contribution that is more important is the training as a geographer, that in every nice interview that gives Rosalie Hernandez, in the last interview that she gives, he argues that he's not a geographer, that he can beat anything, that it was nothing in life. He couldn't be a man of idea with profoundly left, because geography he came to know was the reality of Cuban countryside and the social situation that he had and the Cuban society had. Nor he could have come to deal with the same sweetness and with the same courtesy to Guajiro, more secular than an ambassador or a president even. Then, without being a geographer, he could never have been anything that he was. I think the foundation that we try to remember in our country and the continent that is very important of these professions. Sometimes it is very forgotten that he posed a lot, and you cannot love that is not known. And the only way to love the place where we live, the world and the planet is through geography and not another discipline. You will put other nerve as earth sciences, but it's geography, for me, it's geography.
This 2080 is the 30th anniversary of the expedition of the Amazon canoe to the Caribbean made by Nuñez together with a group of scientists. What importance have this expedition today?
Well, the objectives that were raised in the expedition 30 years ago was first, as he said, that the Latin Americans actually do science and also practice it as well. Normally, and for obvious reason, for issues that we already know, who have come to the science here are the countries that are more developed, countries of the first world. And that has always been like this, and unfortunately it still is. Now, Latin America advances, grows up, and also its science. But it's still different in these countries, and us are beginning to practice that science can be recorded. Because there are many communities that make their science, what happens is the method of registering and associating is the one that fails or does not complete the process. Or so, that it raised was to create this conciliation, the logistical condition for each country to incorporate local scientists so they can access the opportunities and to do their research and socialize them, to make how to know their science. That was the methodology that my father used as a particular investigation. They had to make a scientific symposium in every important city. There was an exploration, a scientific expedition where they socialized the research of biologists, geographers, anthropologists, and all other scientists and even artists that were also deeply involved in this exposure, even social communicators as well. I personally believe that the validity of the way even being complimented that we saw in the moment of 30 years of anniversary. For example, the reporter that could not count on locals because of the time of film he had to hire from the Spanish television. Because there was no Telesur, for example. There was no sign of the soul, for example. There was no strong way of communication or continual communicative process. In 30 years, that made us see how much we managed to arrange in the same way what seems as a slogan, or even something that is kind of treaty in Latin America that unite people, that despite having very similar story, there is a lot of fermentation as well. That was what we saw when we saw the symposium. Remember, in the 30 years that we one of the things we saw, the fermentation that studies is still the Amazon and the Caribbean. It is very separated as well, because there are very different cultural rules of information, and projects like this try to shorten those gaps. So that's why it's very important to be effective, because we need to close those gaps.
Why is this expedition considered a feat? What was that scientific consciousness that woke up?
My father was always a man of ideas that seemed impossible to reach from the eyes of the other people. It was always like that, even when he died. Then, when he published the book, Gabriel Garcia Marquez was actually the one to make the prologue to the book. It's a wonderful prologue. I really recommend it. Search for it. It tells of the capacity of the human being that before achieving something where he feels had to happen is in your ideas, and that God speaks of the wonderful moment when a human being has an idea and it differentiates most of that privileged minority that achieves their dreams is that instant between the dream and the beginning of taking the first steps. In that, I consider the greatness of Nuñez as a scientist and also as a human being, to articulate people of very dissimilar way of thinking and how to seek financing out of nothing. And then, when this expedition happened, we have to remember to conceptualize. There was no email, there was no internet. It was all by fax, by phone calls, or even go to see the person. He had to interview every president of these countries even in that time had armed conflicts. For example, Peru and the Ecuadorian government had a very complicated relationship at the time. They have cannons to cross that border. They had a commitment to each country to protect its military forces. They gave them a certain level, a little bit low or even very low, but good. They gave at the same time level of military protection, because obviously it is the responsibility of the country to provide it, and thereafter committed to themselves. I would say personally that the major complexity of this expedition at that time was to articulate all that. That is what happened before the actual expedition. And even I'm thinking of making the article called The Another Canoe. I'm talking about this philosophy of how everything in life seemed to even change. Behind there is a whole other world that had a lot of difficulties and even problems, and how human beings can confront them.
At present, what is the mission of the Antonio Nuñez Jimenez Foundation of Nature and Men?
Our mission is to continue the legacy of Antonio Nuñez Jimenez, continue with the legacy of his founding, including the imprint of Lou Lopez, who was the president of the foundation for 10 years. When my father died in the year 1998, my mother assumed the presidency. Then, the current mission of the foundation is to continue the legacy, balancing the cultural theme and the environmental issue, and also incorporating all the artists' manifestations and, in a way, the language of being able to explain the levels of environmental complexity.
How does this NGO work according to the implementation, for example, of the government plans, the tax life?
We are happy with the state plan. Consider that the Cuban state took a huge leap. I think that years ago the state did not even articulate in such an important and necessary form to all its agency of the central administration of the state. And in person I think it's very beautiful that what amount that is the environmental issue. I think it was something extraordinary. I know that our minister and her advisors have done an extraordinary job. We are happy that the civil society has made a plan of state in the task life. Obviously, the Cuban state is an important actor. It has a very strong social, economic, political weight. And toward the environmental issue, it is necessary to be well articulated when its instances. And every so often we ask to the ministries about who all those do the natural resources and those who have under their managed precisely environmental management. In that, we appointed especially with whom to interact, and we can define better our work, no doubling the efforts of the instance of ours. We like to work where more the problems are, where the complexity needs more support. That is our philosophy of work. And we need to be well articulated because we are certified workers at the time, and we have to instance it very well. For that, we make a process where we reconcile with the states where it seems to us more useful to the places of greater complexity. For example, fragile ecosystems, communities where they have more diminished environmental perception. Those kind of issues that we like to work with. Where, for example, there is greater vulnerability to the effects of the climate change, of the extreme weather events. We really like the world, and obviously we want to make it reconcilable with the World Health Organization. By Monday, have to give a solution to that world. So with that methodology, we receive the Ministry of Environment. We are actually very surprised because there are ministers who have come with the Minister of the Ministers. In this case, there are others who have seen specialists, there are others who have not answered, but we will insist because we think it's very important to keep the harmony, the role, and we rest with the state entities. And the minister, when she came, she raised us to how she saws the role of the foundation that considers with this, I tell you, to make the facilitation of different actors. With now, our hat has an NGO. We have an active fund that state that cannot, or the productionist companies cannot, like international funds, green funds. They're always window from the non-governmental organization. Then we want to complement that contribution that we think very important to be able to do so.
There is now a subject that is stirring up debate and that in the new constitution is being debated. There is a specific law to promote protection and care for the environment. Why is it necessary for this law to exist in Cuba?
The lease law already exists. What happened is like the rest of the laws that are being reconciled in the process, also very valuable for the country, that we give our opinion and then take it to the referendum. Like all the chapters that will have this constitution, the environmental issue must be made a look, and besides there is a law, we must be incorporated in many other dimensions that repellent has nothing to do with it. We're going to deliver the process and brought it to my neighborhood. We're going to make a look, a contribution from the institution. So now I'm going to talk to you like Liliana and Nuñez, not as an institution, as a conforming team for many other people. My vision is that there is a law that obviously, like the rest, you have to attemperate it, you have to contemporarize that. You have to learn to other constitutions that have been very well defined. For example, Ecuador and Bolivia took a step further and put it words with the nature with its language, which in others constitution is called the rights of the Mother Earth or Pachamama. Like the name is because I think it's father and mother. I would like to put it the rights of the earth because it speaks its language. She expresses itself what the human beings have the ability to talk, to take that to a law. So, much of the conception that is made, for example, of the disaster that is blame of nature. I would like to we as a foundation to bring the context of a civilization that is still learning the themes of the nature and what it wants. I think that a conception, the philosophy, and the world in the last 20 years have evolved after the summit of the river that is taking important steps. Maybe not the ones that we wanted, the most up to that, but at least I think we have way different shades of human beings and animals is language. Then you have to take first by the conceptualization you have with a language to be able to take it to sectors that do not match of these complexities and the ways and tools to be able to apply it. I like to be picked in the Constitution. The environmental law exists in Cuba. What we need is to make it up to that. We must make it a little more explicit to the rights of the land. It is necessary to visualize, for example, in this constitution, they will be, if they approve the recourse, very well stratify the work of state, the government, provision of both municipal. I said that, for example, the municipal does not appear in the environmental issue, appears in the provincial, but does not appear explicit in the novel principle, and until they must be strengthened. Because the words of the municipality, not only the local province, have a value. That is, my contribution will be tried to reinforce, does that not prevail from another. And I'll have to fulfill the role. It is national, it is provincial, and it's local. That will be my overall contribution.
Thank you very much, Liliana, for serving us. Thank you for sharing topics like this about the environment, to know a little more about the work of the foundation and its projects, where they come from and where they go.
Thank you so much. Hiro will always have my open doors for you.
Thank you very much.